Senate Republicans deal another blow in their effort to repeal Obamacare. We now know a majority of senators voted against a Republican proposal that would repeal the law with a 2-year delay. The final count, 55 nays, 45 yeas. Ed O'Keefe is a Washington Post congressional reporter and CBS News political contributor joining us now from Capitol Hill. Ed, break this down for us. What did senators just vote on, and was this outcome expected?
It was expected. This was an attempt to roll back the Affordable Care Act and over a 2-year period allow Congress to come up with a new plan. It was rejected 55-45 with 7 Republican senators voting with the Democrats against it. They were Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia, Susan Collins of Maine, Dean Heller of Nevada, John McCain of Arizona, Rob Portman of Ohio, Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. All of them, except Susan Collins, voted for almost exactly the same exact measure back in 2015. The difference was, of course, President Obama was president and vetoed the legislation. This time, Donald Trump of Republicans in the White House and had said he'd be happy to sign it, but those 7 senators joining with Democrats to vote against it means they've got to try again. At some point here now in the next 24 hours, we're expecting them to consider a slimmed-down version of repealing the law that would focus primarily on eliminating the individual and the employer mandates that require them to offer health care insurance or to get it, as well as repealing the medical device tax. That so-called skinny repeal, if passed, would head into negotiations with the House. But they're moving on right away on the floor right now to another measure, this one introduced by the Democrat Joe Donnelly of Indiana. It's an attempt to, in essence, send this entire situation back to the committees to have them sort out some of the differences. In this case, it would essentially take the health care bill as introduced to the Senate, send it back to the Budget Committee, and have them remove anything that has anything to do with expanding Medicaid, which is seen as a sticking point for all Democrats and a handful of Republicans who hail from states that have seen their Medicaid programs expand successfully and provide coverage to hundreds of thousands of people. It's a trickier vote for some Republicans, especially John McCain, for example, who said yesterday that he wanted to see Congress return to what's called regular order of having bills considered in committees before they're brought to the floor. That's not what happened with this health care bill. And the fact that it's introduced by Joe Donnelly is no mistake. He's a moderate Democrat from Indiana and faces a tough re-election fight next year in a state that Donald Trump won. This will allow him to say to voters back home, hey, I want to fix the Affordable Care Act as well. I wanted to make some changes to it. My Republican colleagues didn't let me do it. So a little bit of politics going on both sides of the aisle here today with the health care vote.
I want to unpack a little bit of what you just explained to us, one being Senator McCain's speech on the Senate floor, which moved a lot of people that watched it. And he talked about normal order, as you just discussed. Was that a reference to the fact that the drafting of the original health care bill was done confidentially? And if that was the problem that Senator McCain had, why did he go ahead and vote yes on continuing the process when they could have just gone back to the drawing board?
Yes, and good question. He hasn't fully explained himself as to how he's voted since that speech. But what he was criticizing was the fact that Mitch McConnell essentially wrote this bill behind closed doors, consulting with his colleagues one by one on what exactly would end up in it, and didn't hold any hearings in the process about it. So, meantime, he voted last night for one version of repealing the law, the one that had been written by McConnell behind closed doors, and yet just voted against the version that Republicans considered 2 years ago that would essentially repeal the entire thing. So it's caused a lot of confusion for his constituents, for his supporters, for his critics, but it's a great example of the challenge that a handful of Republicans are facing. They're getting squeezed on both sides, from their conservative supporters and from their liberal critics.
So again, to catch up our viewers, the latest effort by Senate Republicans to repeal Obamacare has failed by a vote of 45 to 55, which means a number of Republicans voted with Democrats, all of whom voted no. Joining us now is Ed O'Keefe, the Washington Post congressional reporter, as well as a CBS News political contributor, just to lay all of this out for us. Moving ahead, Ed, talk to us in a little bit more detail about what to expect.
Well, they're going to reject this Democratic proposal to slow things down and sort of return this issue to committees instead of hashing it out here on the floor. After this, we're still not entirely certain. We enter sort of a very fluid period here where any number of proposals could be brought forth or scratched. And in the meantime, Senate Majority Leader McConnell and his team are meeting with Republicans to sort of sort out what ultimately could work and what won't. What we're anticipating, and again, it's only, mid-afternoon here on Wednesday, is that at some point on Thursday, you're going to see a series of proposals considered that would make changes to health care that are backed by Republicans or Democrats or members of both parties. And they're going to hold a series of votes on them, up or down, to reject or adopt each of them. On Capitol Hill, we call it a vote-a-rama, where they literally just vote on something, move on to the next one, debate it for a few moments, vote on it, and move on to the next one. It's possible we could see as many as 20 up or down votes, maybe fewer than that, but Democrats have said that they're going to introduce hundreds of potential amendments to this legislation in an attempt to sort of call out what they believe is Republican hypocrisy, but also an attempt to slow down the process entirely. The goal is to have something passed by the Senate by Friday afternoon so that negotiations on a compromise can begin during the August recess that is scheduled to begin, at least in the House, next week.
Yeah, and big question whether even after the vote-a-rama you talked about, Republicans can get a bill they agree on. Ed O'Keefe on Capitol Hill, thanks so much.